The viewpoints expressed on Night Fright are not necessarily those of the host, the staff, the sponsors, or the affiliate stations. Tonight's program may contain graphic themes or images. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is a time for question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for horror and conspiracy. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome one and all to Night Fright. Wonderful show for you tonight, so jump in that comfy chair, kick your feet back as always, get the coffee going, get the tea going, or a beverage of choice. Now, our guest tonight, I feel like I've watched our guest tonight grow up before my eyes on the screen. He starred in his dad's Oliver Stone's films, The Doors, JFK, Natural Born Killers, and Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, before becoming a director in his own right with Greystone Park. Now, the movie was based on Stone's experience of exploring haunted mental asylums. Yeah, Sean Stone's our guest tonight with his new book, New World Order. Sean has done great work, folks, with Save the Children in Somalia and the gang prevention program Unity One for Jim Brown's Amer I Can group in Los Angeles. Stone currently co-hosts the RT News show, Watching the Hawks, which airs internationally. It is my great pleasure to welcome Sean to the show for the very first time, but most definitely not the last time. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you, Brent.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you having me. Night Fright. I love it. That's my kind of night.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because as we record this show, tonight is November 8th, folks, 2016. The outcome of the American election's not decided yet between Hillary Clinton and, of course, Donald Trump. The fate remains unknown at this point as we record this at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Sean, in a few days, November 22nd is going to be upon us, the anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy. Sean, many people feel today that both candidates, Hillary and Trump, are completely unworthy to sit in the seat Jack sat. Do you feel we might be dealing with the consequences of that assassination, November 22nd, 1963, of JFK?
I mean, I don't know about in this present moment being more of a, what do you say, is this higher than previous moments? It's an interesting question, and maybe we'll compare the overall mood, especially vis-a-vis the Russians, to the Cuban Missile Crisis, because there is this looming threat of world war. And honestly, I think a lot of the hysteria around the elections has distracted the fact that Obama has led us to this brink of war with the Russians.
Okay, let's get into
very
it.
much.
Let's talk about how you feel Obama's led us to the brink of a global meltdown, if you will, nuclear war. Ted Sorensen, JFK speechwriter, was a friend of mine, and I sat with him in his Manhattan apartment, and he walked us through the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close we really, really were, so that we're able to sit here today. So I'd be interested in seeing the parallels between where we were and how we scraped by and got through that, and how you feel the parallels remain today.
Yes. Well, obviously, it's not a clear-cut an incident. I mean, we've heard reports of 300,000 troops, NATO troops, being prepared for potential war with Russia. We got Russian ships coming down through the sort of the channel around close to England toward the North
Channel,
Sea, right?
Yeah. Mediterranean.
Yeah.
On their way to Syria.
But as far as any one incident, we can't point to yet one incident that is Cuban Missile Crisis moment. But I would just say that on the whole, you have broiling situation where ever since Ukraine, where there was this coup d'etat, against the Ukrainian government, backed by, the National Endowment for Democracy and the State Department and people, Victoria knew like this, right? The point is that since then, there has been a continuous escalation against the Russians, and mainly over the Syria conflict. So even if you want to say, which I wouldn't disagree with, that, is Putin authoritarian? Is he potentially trying to, re-empower the Russian, state? Absolutely. Why is that such a problem for America? Well, because America's playing the British game. If you really want to get into the roots of this, you got to go back. You got to go back to the World Order concept in the book, which is the Anglo-American Empire, which is the British game against the great game in the Middle East that's been going on for over 100 years, long before America got involved, and that the British are still playing, and we have fallen into that modality of empire with the British.
Okay, let's go back to its roots then. Where do you feel it started? With the Versailles Treaty, or do you think it started way before that?
In terms of the New World Order concept, I could speak to. I don't know about, the British Empire roots obviously go back hundreds of years. Frankly, they go back, some people say, even to sorcery. And John Dee, who was the court intelligence, basically he was the head intelligence officer for Queen Elizabeth's court. He was also a practicing occultist, whom some have alleged was involved in summoning spirits and actually creating relationships with jinns or genies to empower the British Empire, because when the sinking of the Spanish Armada in 1888 was miraculous. The Spanish Armada was the greatest in the world. They had the money, they had the gold of the Americas behind them. This was a tremendous empire, and frankly, a storm helped wipe them out in 1588 to empower the British to now become the champions of the sea. The sea routes were the key maritime trade and merchant economy was the trade for Britain, was the power of the British Empire from 1588 forward, to make them this tremendous empire all the way through the 19th century. So there is this question of where, the exact moment of the birth of the British Empire, but you might say 1588 was a critical moment for them. Now, as far as the 20th century, what happens is, at the end of the 19th century, the British are looking at their empire, which basically encompasses somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the world's landmass. Okay, and it's peoples from Africa to Asia to a little bit in Latin America, not really Latin America. It's really they have a little bit of colony there, but really it's mostly Africa, Asia, Australia, Commonwealth, what become the Commonwealth countries, the dominions, right?
Canada.
Of Canada. Well, India at that time was still British. So
Australia, New Zealand, yeah.
They're looking at this, and they're looking at this empire, and they're saying, well, after the Boers, against the Boers in South Africa, and they're saying, look, how do we maintain this? Because it's a white man's burden, but we can't maintain this. The white population is not large enough to subjugate all the peoples of the planet. So we have to incorporate them. We have to make them feel like they're part of it, and we have to rebrand the empire as the Commonwealth. Right, and start to give certain dominion to other, Anglo peoples, like the South Africans run by Anglo-Saxons and South Africa by blacks. Canada, Ireland, Australia, they can have a home rule status within the dominions, but we gotta basically rebrand the empire. And Cecil Rhodes is a major thinker in that regard. He basically calls for incorporating America into this rebranded British Empire. And Rhodes is famous because he's basically the founder of De Beers. He had consolidated all these diamond mines in South Africa.
Yeah.
Working with Rothschild. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lord Rothschild was his bank. So he basically wanted to reincorporate America into his empire, the new empire, and he had bequeathed his wealth to the Rhodes Trust. As part of that strategy was to integrate through education the various countries of the Commonwealth, including America, and ultimately move towards what H.G. Wells and others who basically were disseminating the same ideology of the Round Table groups. Now, there was dissent, but ultimately the strategy was we need to basically make our empire a global thing, breaks the different people, the colored peoples, and the various nationalities into the empire through education and economics, right? But to ultimately move towards this unified global state. That was the ultimate end goal, whether or not it would be British controlled or federal.
What was the ultimate goal of British imperialism?
Well, what has imperialism always been? It's not the British. It's, it goes back before them to the Venetians, it goes to the Romans, it goes to the Persians. It's always a question of land, accessing real estate, natural resources, slavery in a certain form, but basically keeping a basic, you'd say, an economic control structure of most people in an emaciated, non-emancipated form, basically being either debt slaves or physical slaves, right, who can work property on behalf of the aristocracy or the landed ruling class, and then the bankers that ultimately issue the credit through the central banks, right? The power structures, and the temple oftentimes behind it, right? The temple is one of the mechanisms by which the ruling class can maintain their authority as a spiritual integrity of an empire. So, whether the British Empire's ambition, let's say at the time, was to perpetuate itself. I mean, they were still, at the time, they were obviously part of them. Some of them were race patriots. Some of them felt the Anglo-Saxon race was the greatest in the world.
Yeah.
To see the Anglo-Saxon race prevail upon the planet. But others like H.G. Wells, who were the real hardcore New World Order advocates, said, look, we don't care if it's the British or any nation that ultimately prevails as the greatest power. We simply want a consolidation of power, and it's going to transcend all races, and it's ultimately going to be derived really from a financial governmental center of bureaucrats and technocrats, right? Financiers who control the apparatus. And the more of a New World Order type of thing, Brave New World type of thing, where
Right.
It's basically being run by a scientific dictatorship, right? That goes beyond spiritual, beyond religious or spiritual inclinations, more into this realm of science, Darwinian evolutionary science of, let's say the genetic hierarchy, the ones who are most fit to rule, they are the ones that prevail ultimately.
Sean, do you feel overall that the advent of imperialism only had the one goal, and that was to obtain wealth on the backs of the impoverished? Or do you feel that there was to coin a popular phrase, a new world order to try and raise education amongst the world? I'll give you an example. In Canada, we're a British colonial country. Wherever the British seemed to go, they raised education, they built universities, they built infrastructure, sewers. We saw the fact that the infant mortality rate would lower as well. Do you think that was part of it as well?
Well, no doubt that the empire, this argument now, Ferguson obviously, makes, he's saying the empire did these tremendous things, right? It was able to build railroads and roads, and it, did lower the infant mortality to a certain extent in certain areas. The problem is because Canada was a colony as well, kind of like Australia, in a different mode of operating than for example, like an African, that when FDR went to West Africa, for example, and he saw the remnants of the British Empire there, he said, look, you're basically just extracting the resources on the backs of the people, and your rail systems are only designed to extract the resources. Let's put money into the pockets of the 1% that rule the country. Let's educate them and make them feel as though, they're empowered within our system, and basically ignore the 95% of the population that's just, cut out from the benefits, the rewards. So there is this problem of empire in general, which is, I believe, extractive. It's not about empowering the people locally, and education. Most of the time, a major aspect of this book is to understand that education is tied in integrally to the intelligence services. are training the next generation of leaders for that country, in the political spectrum and the economic spectrum, right, in the major business and finance and foundations and cultural leaders. They're coming from the major universities. So it's a form of warfare on the young to educate them, because whose education are you learning? You're learning that of the victors, right, of the ones who write the history. So there's a real problem when it comes to education, where, who's teaching you, who's writing your books. Why is it that you have in this book New World Order, a study of Eliot, who was Kissinger's mentor. Eliot's teaching all of these people at Harvard, who then become his disciples in some form or another, and then they're teaching the next generation at the Ivy League schools and other colleges, and it's a hub of power. So why is education not disseminated from the perspective of people having more homeschooling is catching on? But what's wrong with homeschooling? What's wrong with actually being involved in the creative process and being able to pick up any number of books, and rather than being taught in the university setting that's very rigorous and standardized for the most part, that doesn't give you access to a greater creative endeavor than what they teach you, then tell you you have to know this to get your degree. Recite facts back to us to get your degree, right?
www.nightfrightshow.com, folks. There you will find Sean Stone's book, A New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. It'll take you right to a spot where you can order it from the comfort of your own home. Urge you to get it. It's got some very interesting ideas and a different spin on what is known as the New World Order. And one of the questions I have for you, is the New World Order a conspiracy theory? Is there some cabal out there that wants to run every single human being in the world?
Right. No, and that's what's really integral to this project, was that it came out of my thesis work, because I had discovered, as I mentioned, I was studying Eliot, who was this professor emeritus at Harvard. He taught Trudeau, for example, Pierre
Elliott,
Pierre Trudeau,
whose son is now our prime minister.
Yes, minister.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
I mean, these people are not all evil, and that's one thing I want to be clear with, is that I think there are a lot of positive intentions behind the New World Order, in the sense that they see themselves as disseminating a system of, they're saying, our traditions of economics, our traditions of law and order, our customs, they think they're the best in the world. Now that's arguable. I think it's a little bit supremacist to think that way, but they actually, there was a tremendous tradition of legality and legal structures, and and
Parliament
this helps.
Itself can be argued, democracy itself, Parliament democracy can be argued that it came from the Britons. So,
right, exactly, parliamentary system and things like this. So they're saying we have this tremendous tradition, and we want to be the basis for the New World Order. Now that phrase, New World Order, is not a conspiracy theory, because it was their own phrase, and that was when I was writing about Eliot, I was coming across this phrase, and it was, whether it was in the 1920s and 30s, so it wasn't a conspiracy theory. New World Order is their own language. Let's look at how they were using it, what they meant by it, trying to understand better what their thinking is, without going into the speculative things about more esoteric aspects, the secret societies, the nature of the reality they're trying to create, the technocratic, bureaucracies.
That's the aspect I want to get across tonight to folks, is that when you examine history, you've got to look at all different aspects. You can't just read one book. You have to read opposing views and all views in the middle, and come up with your own ideas. You don't have to be spoon-fed and be able to regurgitate whatever you're taught. You can actually form your own ideas, as Sean has in his book. This is a pretty good example for the students that are out there that watch this show. You can do this. You can read other people's works, integrate them in your own lives, and come up with your own ideas and push forward society. Now, do you feel that these things are written out and planned, or do you think that they just kind of evolve? I'll give you an example. Everybody's demonizing the Bilderbergers, and with good reason. It's a secret society, quote unquote. But I had Heather Reisman on the show. Heather Reisman owns I'm not sure if you know who she is, but just for the folks who don't, she owns Chapters Indigo, which is our version, Canada's version of Barnes Noble. Now, she gets a lot of flack for a lot of other reasons, but her and I put a show on because there was a woman over in Iran who was about to be stoned to death. And we put a show on together. She instigated the show, she initiated it, and we were able to save that woman's life. So she's not all bad, is what I'm trying to say. She has good intentions. She wants to lower the poverty level everywhere around the world. She wants to do good. And she thinks by getting together with like-minded people with the power to do it, the money, in other words, that she will do some good and leave some kind of legacy that will better mankind. Do you feel much the same way? But yet, every time we seem to do something, the negative consequences are always ever present.
Well, certainly. I mean, you have to recognize there'd be a certain paranoia about people with tremendous amounts of money, influence, and access coming together. Because policies that we see, coming out of countries, and from east to west, doesn't matter where, are corrupt. They're oftentimes military and militaristic. They're oftentimes, working, let's say, like, you take a country like America. I'm putting out a documentary next week called A Century of War. We talk about how America is the most debt of anyone in the world, basically, as citizens, right? We're crippled by our debts. What used to be a blue-collar industrial economy that paid solid wages, that now, one working man can't afford a family of four as he could in 1970. The salaries are not, the minimum wage is lower in comparison. If you compare real wages, it's lower. So we have to take out more credit card debt. So on one hand, we have this freedom of, we can purchase and choose things, but at the same time, we're in deeper debt to have this lifestyle, right? Yeah. We've seen our infrastructure in America. We're seeing rioting and protesting, and it comes from a place of anger and feeling there's a very bleak, nihilistic mood that's taking over, right? I mean, look, Trump speaks to that. There's a reason almost half the country, is responding to him, not because he's necessarily the most educated on solving it, but he's certainly speaking to that feeling.
Agreed.
So you take that and you say, well, why is it that these businessmen, people that have the money and influence, are buying the politicians and influencing them? Why aren't they investing in our country? Why are they not putting resources and working to improve the state of living in our country? They seem to be more interested in exploiting cheap labor abroad and getting access, to foreign markets, and depending on this petrodollar economy to keep, petroleum basically is keeping the dollar as strong as it is. We have this massive military presence all over the globe for what? For, a few thousand terrorists. I mean, it's insane. In Syria, we're literally backing the terror groups. I mean, that's, the Defense Intelligence Agency said in 2012 that, the Salafists basically are the ones who are mostly, opposed to Assad. They tend to be more radical right-wing, not right-wing, but will be considered, radical jihadists. They're backed by the Saudis and, and Qataris and all these countries, and America supporting them. So how can we say that these people who are so wealthy and powerful and influential, are they really doing things to benefit mankind, or to benefit their own self-interest and their own, you wouldn't just say greed, but desire to maintain an empire and a corporate empire? That's a danger to me. It's like these transnational corporations have no allegiance to a country. They have no stake in a country. They don't pay taxes. They go offshore as much as possible. And they find loopholes. And right now, with the system of power, we're in a hierarchy where it's a pyramid structure that people want to go with success. The superstar culture, where it's like, the corporate superstar culture is like, oh, the corporations has the most success, gets the most investment.
Sean Stone's our guest tonight, folks. The book is called New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism, www.nightfrightshow.com. As always, just click on tonight's guest book cover. We'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. Sean, I want to go back to Syria. Wave a magic wand, and all of a sudden you're running for president tonight, and you get elected. What would be your policy? How would you handle Syria? Canada's already taken in 30,000 refugees. I bleed every night for those young kids and the innocents over there. What would your perspective be? What would your strategy be over there?
Well, unfortunately, my strategy would be to immediately cut ties with as much as possible. I mean, you have basically, I wouldn't say immediately. I would work to cut ties with the Saudis. I would basically work to see them replace, with a more Republican or democratic regime. I would basically, cut them off as rulers. I think you have to make Arabia was not always Saudi Arabia. You see Arabia, right? The Saudis are Wahhabists. They're fanatical in their understanding of the religion of Islam. various understandings of Islam that do lead to the Taliban and ISIS understanding of it.
But those are
They're
perversions.
purveyors of terrorism.
That's not true Islam. That is a perversion of Islam. It's like, in my opinion,
That's not,
it's like saying the KKK
wrong.
represents Christianity. It's nonsense.
The Saudi version of Islam.
Right.
And they're, unfortunately, because of their wealth, they're purveying this ideology that's leading to these extreme terror groups and the ones who are, but let's be honest, a lot of these terrorists are being utilized by intelligence services to destabilize countries for operational purposes. So I would shift that, away from the Saudi ideology, and I'd basically work with the Russians in Syria. Assad is going to stay in power. You got to get the country back, at least to some stability again. You actually had the biggest middle class in the Middle East. If you look at the New York Times, admitted that in the 2000s, Syria had the biggest middle class in the Middle East, but hey, no one remembers that now because it's destroyed. The sectarian situation in Iraq is bad. I don't know exactly. I'd have to look at what you do there, unless you find ways of elevating the overall, economy, right? The point is that even Saddam was a bad guy, sure, but he practiced socialism, a certain level of, of education, a certain understanding that you didn't care about your ethnic differences because the economy was at least stable, let's say, until we started the whole, embargoes, and that did hurt them. But more people are in situations of desperation, the more ethnic, racial, religious warfare. It's just clear. I mean, we see it, whether it's America with slavery, any country that you see falling into that kind of warfare, it's because the economy is collapsing. When people are in good times, when everyone has a job, they all trade. They'll go to the market. They don't care if it's a Jew, a Muslim, a Turk, whatever. It's like they all, we're all out there doing this with each other because we ultimately want peace, and peace comes with economy. That's what it boils down to. So I think you have to.
Brings me back to something that I wanted to talk to you about is the free market system. Do you think it's sustainable in this day and age? I'll give you an example. We've gone through tribalism in the world, monarchy, socialism, communism, capitalism. I think capitalism is done. And I always say now we've got to move beyond and find a new ism, something called humanism, because I feel capitalism serves itself. It's all about the bottom line. There's no humanity associated with it at all. We know communism doesn't work, socialism doesn't work. We've seen the examples of that. We've tried that. I think we have to try something else.
Well, capitalism is not dead, but I do think that it has to look. There's different forms of a capitalism, right? There is, when you study American history, what's been washed from history is what's called the American system of economics, which emphasizes that notion of a harmony of interests. The Henry Ford perspective that I want my workers to have decent wages because guess what? They're going to turn around and buy my products.
Exactly right.
Factory owners, do you like, paying your workers? I said, but yeah, because then, we have vacation. Why shouldn't they have vacation? Then we can, when we work together, everyone is more happy, less stressed. We get along. There's a harmony that exists within our workplace because we understand that we're all human. We have to relate to each other as human beings. We have to work together. We don't have to look at each other as as a hierarchy where it's like you have to basically get on your knees and do the whole rise at the totem pole by taking it and being raped along the way.
That was your dad's theme in both Wall Street and Wall Street Money Never Sleeps. Exactly that. The ultimate goal is of course, when labor and management can work in harmony. And there are ways to do that. There's no question.
Exactly. So there is this, this tradition we forgot about. We have cut out of the economic books from education earlier. Education is so powerful because this system got lost and it was replaced by the British imperial systems, which is communism and Adam Smith, free market economics. But both of those are British models, and the American model has been cut out of the history.
You're talking about free markets. I just want to read a quote from the book, folks, and the book is called New World Order, Strategy of Imperialism, as I reach around here. Okay, how am I going to do this? This is from the book, folks. This is a direct quote. Milton Friedman at the Rockefeller-founded University of Chicago, who was committed to the principles that, quote, governments must remove all rules and regulations standing in the way of the accumulation of profits. Second, they should sell off any assets they own that corporations could be running for profit. And third, they should dramatically cut back funding of social programs. In short, and quite unabashedly, He was calling for the breaking of the New Deal. Now, that's Naomi Klein's book as well, folks, mentions that. Now, this is exactly what I think is the problem. I mean, we have to have a social safety net. Here in Canada, we are blessed because we have Medicare. It's not free. We pay taxes for it. Everybody says, oh, it's free Medicare. What the point is, I'll give you a good example why this is so beneficial and essential to have programs like this. In 1963, my dad died of a heart attack. That was before Medicare came in. But he would have had to pay for it, and money was tight. If he had have been in an era of Medicare, he would not have hesitated to go to the hospital. So this is coming back to the humanism aspects of things. This is something I would like to see America lead the way again with. Do you feel much the same way? Do you feel that?
As I'm saying, I mean, there is a harmony of interests. And
yeah.
that what, my documentary, I mentioned A Century of War, because it picks up really with where New World Order leaves off, which is the idea of they're attacking the nation states, right? And the process of attacking the nation states, we've seen America become this military branch of the British Empire, and work towards this clash of civilizations concept, which ultimately, I don't know if it seems like it's designed to consolidate all peoples monoculture, which is to say, let's destroy any indigenous cultures, let's destroy anyone that's peripheral, on the periphery of the empire, doesn't want to accede to financial instruments like the IMF and the World Bank and the central banks of the West, right? Or else, they're culturally opposed, like oftentimes in Islam, you'll see cultural opposition. As long as people buy it, it makes it good. So if people buy McDonald's, democratically, they're choosing McDonald's, right? If people buy Nike, that's democratic choice, right? The problem, of course, is you don't have any safety net, deforestation to give cattle grazing land. It's, very easy to have a toxic food or environment that people, the corporations can get away with. So whether McDonald's or Nike, employing people in sweatshops, basically near slave labor, there's no protection of them. At the same time, we say, well, people buy Nike, and so they're choosing Nike, and so that's good. It doesn't matter if there's a morality or any kind of ethic to that corporation. It's only about the profits, the bottom line. So in terms of this make world, it's like then in opposition, they create this whole notion of, well, jihad is basically the inhibiting our access to these markets, right? The Muslim, austerity, or Muslim spiritual inclination, or not just Muslim, right? It's any indigenous culture that has a spiritual inclination or a relationship to traditions, frankly, would be perceived as the enemy, But right now, Islam is perhaps a very particular foe of the Western world, but it's not done. It's not. We can't say it outright. It has to be done, surreptitiously. So you utilize your allies and you destabilize in Iraq or Libya or, now Syria. Next, who knows, maybe in Iran, or Iran will get bought into the IMF system with this new deal, right? For the nuclear deal, it seems that the IMF and the World Bank will then access Iran. So gradually they'll work it. Basically they'll start to sell their goods and their products. And again, I'm all for trade between countries, but it has to be done, from a perspective of fair trade. The fact is, countries should not be forced to open their doors and say the IMF conditionality state, you have to, basically pay us back, the World Bank back on these loans. So the IMF conditionality say you have to basically shut down your social welfare programs, or cut your tariffs to zero, or you name it, right? The whole point is that's conditionalities, that's slavery. I believe in fair trade. Okay, you have something, America doesn't produce certain things, we should be able to trade. And if if America produces cars and Japanese produce cars, then we should have tariffs and say, look, if we like your product, they should be more comparable in price, and it's simply because your product delivers different values that I choose it. But it shouldn't be because I can get your car for $5,000, but meanwhile it's going to crush into a tin can in an accident. That's not the way you protect America. You have to have tariffs. Just America, any country, you have to have tariffs to protect your economy and your workers and your manufacturing, the way that Europeans have the VAT, right, the value added taxes. Mm-hmm. And it's sensible. So the idea is that there's still there's a certain competition in price, but the problem with free trade is that it leads to the biggest corporation, the biggest fish gobbling up the other fish.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
I want to jump in a bit of a different direction, if it's okay with you. You brought up Islam, and I feel that Islam is getting a hard knock, if you will, from the Western world. Now, would you be comfortable about talking about your visit to Estevan?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so can you tell us that story, what happened in Estevan for you, and what was the result of that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for example, when it comes to Islam, I have a certain understanding of it, frankly, having not just read the Quran, but also visited Iran a few times, 3 times. And when I went to Isfahan, I accepted Muhammad as a prophet, and that technically makes me a Muslim. So I always found this very interesting, quirky concept in terms of religion. Is that personally, I never grew up with any religion per se. I'm someone who believes that religion is very political, and I've always embraced all religions as a true as true path, different variations of true path. Right? There's one creator, I believe,
Yeah.
and I believe that Islam is a continuation of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Great.
And so to recognize Muhammad as a prophet,
If I'm not
makes me a
mistaken,
Muslim.
if I'm not mistaken, it says in the Quran that there's as many ways to come to God as there is people in the world. In other words, everybody has their own personal connection with God.
That's
So
right.
it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, there's in Islam they say there are 99 names for God because there really should not be one name. There should be many names. And so people say, "Oh, Allah is God." It's like, well, no, actually, it's one creator.
Yeah.
And so when I, again, so I read the Quran, I take it from my interpretation, and I felt, this is a continuation of the Judeo-Christian tradition. So Muhammad, I believe, is a prophet, that same tradition, and I accept him as a prophet. Well, that makes me a Muslim. So when I said this and I accepted this, then it became a stir, and Sean is now a Muslim or something. And it's like it misses the point, which is I think someone's religion is very much a personal path. It's frankly, it should be personal. I think many of the problems we have in religion now are trying to externalize and politicize your own creator. And I don't try. I think that even in Islam, it's like you're not supposed to. It says basically you're not. There is no compulsion in religion. You should not should not force anyone into a path of religion. When it comes to ethics, we have ethics. Oftentimes ethics are based in religious principles, right? Going back to the Mosaic laws about organizing and how we as people recognize and respect each other. But too much of the political strife in the world has boiled down to these religious differences. And I just say, look, each one of those paths is your personal path, and I respect that path. And it's about you following your spiritual journey here. Because I think, for me, life is not a physical reality, it's a spiritual reality. So you have to have a faith in something that's going to keep you alive, your spirit going, and in believing in something that's going to happen, either even before you came here, but also after you die, you're going to move on somewhere else. So as long as you don't use it and abuse it to harm others, religion is a beautiful thing, but it gets corrupted, and I'm very sensitive to that danger. But I try to understand and study the religions as much as possible, and basically see how we can bridge the misunderstandings to come to those common cores of, as you say, humanism. The idea is that, yes, we are all created from the same source. We have different colors, in different lands, with different traditions, different languages. But yet we have a common creator, recognizing similarities, and this, how these different faiths and different understandings actually do correlate. And let's embrace and celebrate our similarities and also our differences. There's nothing wrong with having every different color of the rainbow. That's what makes the rainbow more beautiful.
When you were in Iran, did you pick up any Farsi?
Well, no, I don't really know Farsi at
I
all.
was going to say salam tutori, but that's okay. Folks, I just want to tell you that the Persian Empire also, you're going to know King Cyrus. He's in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, Old Testament, if you will. King Cyrus was unique. He brought in the first declaration of human rights. Yeah, Persian Empire. Persians are not Arabs,
Yeah.
they're different people. It's like saying Italians and Greeks are the same people. They're different people. The Persian Empire goes back thousands and thousands of years. So if you want to do some research about human rights, this is where it all comes from. Right there, the Persian Empire. Just want to read this part. The Mahdi is the prophesied redeemer of Islam who will rule for 7 or maybe 19 years, according to different interpretations. Now, before the day of judgment, and will rid the world of evil. According to Islamic tradition, the Mahdi's tenure will coincide with the second coming of guess who? Jesus. So when I hear Christians say Islam is evil, they're out to kill us, let me read that part again. The Mahdi's tenure will coincide with the second coming of Jesus Christ. And they will fight together to bring peace on the world. So I think it's important to talk about this, and I'm glad you consented to talk about your newfound beliefs with the audience. Because my audience, I'll tell you, Sean, is primarily students. What I try to do is inspire them and get them to think for themselves. I'd like to switch back now. We started off with JFK. I want to go back to the movie JFK when you were just little. You were so cute, Sean. In the movie, what happened? Now you're tall, you're hairy. I say that to my nephews too, don't worry. One goes to Stanford, and that's where I got the cup from. Okay, in the movie JFK, you play Kevin Costner's character, Jim Garrison's son. At one point, you ask Kevin, Daddy, do we have to go away because of Kennedy? Now, I want you to put yourself in a father position, and if your child asked you that, do we have to go away because of whoever wins the presidency tonight? What would you say to your child?
No, I don't think so. I'm not scared of Trump. I really,
I didn't say any names. By the way, folks, the borders are still open to Canada. You're all welcome.
There's a script that's unfolding, and if there is a collapse kind of function that's supposed to occur regarding the economy and regarding the Civil War scenario, we've seen a lot of the predictive conditioning, predictive programming in the media and film and TV around that concept. Then maybe Trump would usher that in which case that's just part of the script. Hillary wins, and we continue with this Cold War with Russia. Maybe it escalates even worse, and the Syria situation in the Middle East just continues to devolve for the next 4 years. Then that's part of the script. I would, it would be nice to see one of these guys step up. Hillary's talked about exposing UFOs. I would love it. If she did that. Trump's talked about exposing conspiracies like 9/11. You know what? It'd be awesome if he came in and did that. So you got to look at the situation and say, just like anything, New World Order has two meanings. There's the dark, and there's the positive of saying, hey, maybe as we come together, we do wake up and become conscious human beings, and recognizing we are more similar than different, and stop being afraid of each other, and we overcome that fear. Then, hey, it can be the new day, the sign of the new day of the Illuminati and these guys. That can be a great thing. It doesn't have to be just about their corporate cyber control of us and our brains, and the surveillance and the now tech that's being used that could be used against us. So I always try to stay positive in things, And by the way, when you mentioned Cyrus, just want to point out that Muhammad was recognized by the Supreme Court in the 1920s in America as one of the prime lawgivers. And they honored him as a lawgiver, and they basically, were giving praise to him as as basically one of these, one of the chief lawgivers in history, right? People like Solon and others who come before, and they basically have to remember that he instituted the Constitution of Medina, which it basically gave the rights to the various religious groups to practice in peace, right? So tolerance was offered in Medina according to the Constitution at the time, and basically gave even for pagans, Jews, Christians, each one respected in their right to worship. So that's a very important point about Muhammad that, of course, anyone who says, "Oh, just a bloodthirsty pedophile terrorist," ignores.
Yeah, you've got to do your own research, folks, and come to your own conclusions, but you have to look at every side and understand the context and the time as well. So, a couple of more questions. Now, your dad's a war hero, in my eyes. He was wounded in battle. He was in Vietnam. He fought in Vietnam. Did you ever discuss his war experiences amongst yourselves?
Um, sure. I've been to Vietnam with him. Frankly, we went to Vietnam together. He showed me some of the. Not he wasn't not exactly he was fighting closer to Cambodia, but he would tell me some stories about. I went through some of those tunnels and to see how I was shocked by how small Vietnamese are to fit in that tunnel system, because they literally had their entire home was set up in those
Exactly.
in the bunkers and tunnels. They literally had almost cities built like ants, right? And I was 13 years old, and I was still too big to go inside. I was amazed at how small these guys must have been.
And I'd be done for.
Right?
Okay, making light of a serious subject, but I'm going to tell you something. Ted Sorensen, as I said, was my buddy. And he said that Kennedy's perspective on war was honed because he lost his older brother in World War II. Joe Kennedy was on a suicide mission, and the mission failed. And also because of what happened to him on PT-109 when his boat was virtually sliced in half. He was repulsed by war. Have you had something like that happen to you because of your conversations with your dad?
Or happened to me in what sense?
Well, how has your dad's war experience and you sharing that with him by going to Vietnam in conversation, how has that altered your view or created your perspective on war?
Oh, sure. Well, sure. War is something, 9/11 occurred when I was at the end of my high school experience. And obviously, I could have joined up and said, I'm going to go and, fight for my country. And I didn't. I decided, look, I don't buy it. I think that there is just war. There is a just war when you're immediately threatened, when there is a real enemy that you have to defend your home, your family, your nation against. But these are not just wars. These are extensions of power for an elite. I think the enemy is closer to home than abroad. I think that these are manipulated false flags for the most part that we see, designed to basically put us into a state of fear so that we can be better controlled. And for me, war and fighting is the last thing you want to see. We want to use our words and our minds as much as possible. But there are some people that deserve to die. I don't doubt that. I think, but their point is, you can be smart about it. You can be smart when you're fighting a war. I liked what Kennedy was doing with the Green Berets. It's like, you assassinate, you go, you train and you assassinate, and you go for the real criminal components that can't be converted, that can't be negotiated with, that are fanatical, that are sociopaths maybe, right? That you have to target those people.
Okay.
Don't let them influence.
I just want to pass on a message from Bev Oliver, who's a very good friend of mine. She says, hey. Yeah, I don't know if you remember Bev Oliver. She was the Babaushka lady in JFK. Her story was made by your dad in the movie JFK, and she tells this wonderful little story, apparently, where you curled up in her lap and fell asleep when you were little. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just what she told me. So she says, hey.
Right.
Okay. So, moving right along, where do you see the world going?
Where do I see the world going?
We're in a quagmire right now, like never before.
I'm an optimist. I believe, to me, I'm an alchemist, I guess, in spirit. Alchemy is the idea that we're going to transform lead into gold, that we go through the dark night of the soul. You have to go through the darkness. This world is hell, and there's a lot of suffering and pain here, and yet we have to find the spiritual salvation and not looking for someone else to save you. That's why I don't agree with a lot of people who have a relationship with the Creator, but understand that we're all in this together, and that we're all going through our own education in the process. And whatever occurs, it's ultimately for your education and for your growth as a spirit, as a human. But understand that you still have things to learn, you still have things to evolve and grow through and understand in a spiritual form. And you should, of course, it's wonderful to have things in this life, but this is not the Next thing you know, you live well, you have money, and you have power. Next thing you know, you're going through another incarnation as as a suffering, starving person in a country that you would never want to go near. And you have to go through that incarnation because maybe we're not humble in this existence.
I think that's a great way to leave it. You have to go through the dark to see the light. You have to be immersed in dark in order to appreciate the light. Folks, Sean Stone's been our guest tonight, and I can't believe an hour's gone by already. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Sean. The book is called, of course, New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism, www.nightfrightshow.com. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you all for joining us.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice on the dark for paranormal and conspiracy. The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. NightFrightShow.com.